He wore a collar of precious stones and ate oats mixed with gold flakes. But the most terrifying thing about this white stallion wasn't his luxury, it was his rank. While the citizens of Rome scraped for bread in the shadow of the Forum, Incitatus lived in a private marble palace equipped with 18 servants and furniture carved from the finest ivory. This wasn't just a pet. To the young Emperor Caligula, this horse was a god, a confidant, and eventually a political weapon. Imagine the humiliation of the Roman Senate. Men who had conquered nations and commanded legions were forced to bow deeply before a beast. At state banquets, Incitatus sat at the head of the long table, draped in blankets of royal Tyrian purple, a colour forbidden to anyone but the emperor himself. Servants frantically fanned the animal with giant ostrich feathers, while Caligula raised a golden chalice, toasting the horse's health. The room would fall deathly silent. Everyone knew that a single snort of displeasure from the stallion, or a failure to show proper reverence, could mean immediate execution. It was the ultimate power move. Caligula was proving he could turn a horse into a magistrate and treat magistrates like animals. But the madness didn't stop at dinner parties. The emperor began drafting the official paperwork to name Incitatus a consul, the highest elected office in the entire empire. He claimed the horse was more honest than any politician in the city. It was a joke that had gone too far, a terrifying satire written in blood and marble. The laughter, however, was about to die. As Caligula stood in the Senate house, mocking the very foundations of Rome with his four-legged colleague, the shadows on the wall grew longer. The Praetorian Guard had seen enough. The emperor's mockery of tradition became his death warrant. When the daggers finally fell, Caligula's reign ended on the cold stone floor. And Incitatus, the horse who almost ruled the world, simply went back to being a horse. He remains history's strangest symbol of absolute power, a reminder that when a tyrant loses his mind, the whole world becomes a stable.
They fed him enough cyanide to kill 5 men, yet he asked for more wine. Inside the gold-leafed silence of the Winter Palace, the most powerful family on Earth was held hostage by a secret, terrified whisper. The heir, Alexei, was bleeding internally. Doctors were helpless. The only thing standing between the boy and death was a dirty, unwashed peasant from Siberia. Grigory Rasputin didn't use medicine. He used terror and magnetism. With greasy hair and eyes that burned like blue ice, he'd loom over the small, pale prince. He'd mutter prayers, lay a weathered hand on the feverish forehead, and, impossibly, the bleeding would stop. To Tsarina Alexandra, he wasn't a man, he was a saint sent by God. But outside the bedroom, the aristocracy saw a demon. He smelled of barnyards and scandal, yet he dictated state policy while the Tsar was at war. Rumours of debauchery and dark rituals swirled through St. Petersburg. The princes decided, for the empire to survive, the mad monk had to die. December 1916, a subterranean cellar. Prince Yusupov watched in horror as Rasputin devoured cakes laced with potassium cyanide. The monk didn't gasp. He didn't choke. He just grinned, his teeth stained with cream and poison, and asked for the Madeira. Panic set in. Yusupov drew his pistol and fired point blank into Rasputin's chest. The body fell, but minutes later, the corpse opened one eye. He lunged, screaming a curse that would haunt the dynasty. It took 3 more bullets and a club to finally drop him. Even then, they didn't trust he was dead. They bound his hands and shoved him through a hole in the frozen Neva River. When they pulled him from the ice 3 days later, his hands were raised, claws frozen as if he had tried to break the surface. He left behind a final letter. "If the nobles kill me, the Tsar will lose his crown." 3 months later, the Romanovs fell. The prophecy was the only thing that survived the cold. Rome didn't just burn, it was erased. It began as a single spark in the belly of the Circus Maximus, but the summer wind instantly whipped it into a firestorm that would rage for 6 relentless days. The wooden tenements of the poor became kindling, turning the city's narrow streets into suffocating tunnels of heat and ash. While the mob trampled one another to escape the crashing marble columns, a solitary silhouette stood watching from the safety of the Palatine Hill. Emperor Nero wasn't organizing bucket brigades. He was standing on his balcony, draped in purple silk, staring into the abyss with a terrifying, ecstatic calmness. He held a delicate wooden lyre, his fingers plucking a melody that competed with the screams below. He wasn't mourning his capital. He was performing for it. Down in the smoke, the chaos felt engineered. Terrified citizens reported thugs with torches, attacking anyone trying to douse the flames, claiming they were acting under orders. The fire wasn't just allowed to burn, it was being fed. When the inferno finally died, 10 of Rome's 14 districts were black wastelands. But amidst the cooling embers, Nero was already busy. He stood over a sprawling architectural model, pointing his golden scepter at the land where the poor once lived. He didn't see a graveyard. He saw the foundation for his Domus Aurea, his golden house. The destruction was simply the necessary cost of his vanity. As the sun rose over a charred Roman eagle lying in the soot, the empire realized the truth. Nero hadn't just watched Rome die. He had cleared the way for his own private paradise. They found his body floating in the waist-deep shallows of Lake Starnberg, his pocket watch frozen forever at 6:54 p.m. There was no water in his lungs, yet the official ruling was death by drowning. This wasn't just the tragedy, it was the final violent act of a life lived entirely in the borderlands between genius and insanity. King Ludwig II built the castles that inspired our modern fairy tales, yet he died a prisoner of his own imagination. Look at Neuschwanstein. Those white limestone cliffs and blue turrets aren't just architecture, they are a fortress against reality. While Europe marched toward industrialization, Ludwig was bankrupting Bavaria to build opera sets made of stone. He slept by day and lived by night, retreating to the Linderhof Palace. There he constructed the Venus Grotto, a massive artificial cave with a subterranean lake. Picture a solitary king, dressed as a medieval knight, drifting in a golden swan boat beneath electric lights that shifted from red to blue, listening to Wagner operas performed for an audience of one. But the solitude turned toxic. In the unfinished Hall of Mirrors at Herrenchiemsee, the silence was deafening. He wandered rooms intended to rival Versailles, surrounded by thousands of candles that illuminated nothing but his growing paranoia. His own government declared him mentally unfit, not because he was mad, but because he was expensive. They dragged him from his sanctuary under the cover of rain. The next evening, he went for a stroll with the very psychiatrist who diagnosed him. Hours later, both men were dead. No witnesses, no autopsy, just a floating hat and a mystery that has survived a century. Today, the castles that ruined him save his country's economy every year. He once wrote, "I wish to remain an eternal enigma to myself and to others." As the mist rolls off the Bavarian Alps, hiding the truth of that dark water, it is clear the king kept his promise. He conquered 6 warring kingdoms to create an empire that still bears his name. Yet the most powerful man on earth was terrified of the one thing he couldn't kill. Qin Shi Huang didn't just build the Great Wall to keep his enemies out. He built an entire underground universe to keep himself in. Beneath the dust of Xi'an, an army of 8,000 clay soldiers stands in eternal formation. Every face is unique. Every weapon was real. They weren't just art, they were bodyguards for the afterlife. But the Emperor's paranoia ran deeper than stone and clay. Deep inside the central burial mound, a tomb no living human has entered in 2,000 years, lies a massive scale model of his empire. Historical records claim the rivers and oceans weren't made of water, but of flowing, toxic mercury. Modern soil samples confirm the earth there is saturated with the metal. He was literally swimming in poison, believing it was the nectar of the gods. Desperation drove him to madness. When his fleets failed to find the islands of immortals, he turned to shadow alchemists. They handed him a carved jade cup filled with a glowing, ruby-red potion. Cinnabar, jade, mercury. He drank the heavy metals that were slowly destroying his brain and organs, convinced they were hardening his body against death. It didn't work. He died on a tour of his eastern provinces, his body rotting in a carriage filled with fish to hide the smell of decomposition from his own subjects. Back at the tomb, the cruelty was final. To keep the location of the underground palace secret, the artisans and concubines were herded inside. The massive stone doors slammed shut, sealing the living with the dead. Today, the clay army still waits. The mercury rivers might still flow in the dark. Qin Shi Huang sacrificed everything for eternity. And in a twisting irony, he got it. Not as a living god, but as a ghost guarding a tomb we are still too afraid to open.
History's most bizarre massacre didn't involve a legion of soldiers or a hidden blade. It happened at a dinner party, and the weapon was literally tons of flower petals. Rome, 218 AD. The empire is under the thumb of Elagabalus, a 14-year-old high priest who treats the throne like a toy. He paints his eyes with kohl, dresses in foreign silks, and forces the Senate to worship a black stone meteorite. He is chaos incarnate. But the elite still flock to his palace, desperate for a taste of his legendary excess. Tonight, the dining hall is a haze of gold and incense. Guests recline on silver couches, gorging on flamingo tongues and honeyed wine. Elagabalus sits at the head, draped in purple, watching them with a bored, predatory stare. He isn't eating. He's waiting for the signal. Above the revelry, the reversible ceiling panels groan. Suddenly, the wood splits open. A torrential waterfall of violets and deep red roses crashes down. At first, the guests cheer. It's a spectacle, a reign of pure luxury. They scoop up handfuls, laughing, drunk on the beauty of it all. But the flowers don't stop. The cascade becomes an avalanche. The laughter dies as the drifts rise past their waists, then their necks. Panic sets in. They try to stand, but the sheer weight of thousands of pounds of botanicals pins them down. The sweet scent becomes choking. The beauty becomes a suffocating blanket. Hands claw desperately toward the surface, only to be buried deeper by the relentless flow. Slowly, the muffled screams fade into absolute silence. From his high perch, safe above the colorful flood, the boy emperor simply takes a sip of wine. He watches the stillness, satisfied that his guests have been smothered by his generosity. It remains the only time in history a room full of powerful men was killed by something as fragile as a rose.
The most powerful man in late medieval Europe wasn't afraid of English longbows or court assassins. He was terrified that a single, gentle touch would shatter him into 1,000 jagged pieces. King Charles VI of France didn't just lose his mind. He believed his flesh and bones had transmuted into fragile glass. Deep inside the freezing stone corridors of the St. Paul Palace, the air is heavy with frost. It is 1392, and the king sits frozen in a high-backed wooden chair. He is wrapped in layers of thick wool, but beneath the fabric lies a secret armor, iron rods sewn directly into his tunic. It is a metal cage designed to keep his brittle body from snapping in half. He refuses to move. He refuses to bathe. His only connection to reality is the cold. Servants approach silently, placing large, jagged blocks of clear mountain ice onto silver trays. Charles stares at them with a hollow, haunted intensity. He presses his trembling, pale fingers against the freezing, wet surface. The biting pain is the only thing that makes him feel solid. The numbness is the only proof he is real. But this fracture in his mind didn't begin in the ice. It was forged in fire. Years prior, at the disastrous Ball of the Burning Men, the king danced in a shaggy costume of resin and pitch. A stray torch turned the masquerade into a slaughter. He cringed in the shadows, watching his friends ignite like human torches, their screams searing into his memory. That heat broke him. Now he hides in the dark, flinching at his own reflection. Every sudden noise is a hammer waiting to strike. He is a prisoner in his own kingdom, a monarch made of crystal, waiting for gravity to do its work. History names him Charles the Mad, but in this room, he is just a frightened man, holding his breath, watching a drop of water fall from the ice and shatter on the floor, waiting for the moment he finally breaks.